it sounds like you're looking to kind of help prove out the go-to-market motion. And so I'm curious, what are some strong signs that, you've got a good, you've got a proven go-to-market model?
Well, proven go-to-market by definition, proven meaning it's successful. So to me, that means it's a systematic approach that is repeatable and consistent and predictable. So like if you have all of those pieces together, you get that predictability, meaning it can act as a lever for your business. So if I pour more money into the marketing, sort of the marketing engine, the top of the funnel, then I can expect a certain dollar output at the other end in a very repeatable, predictable way, meaning that if I spend more, I'll get more out the other side. And it is a predictable number that's proportionate to the spend. So it's a lever we can pull back and forth. So to me, that's a proven model. If it's a crapshoot and you don't really know and it's kind of all over the place, like you put, okay, we're going to ramp this up and we're going to see, and maybe we get more at the other end, maybe we don't. Maybe it drives more leads, but those leads don't convert. Then it's not proven yet. We're still iterating and we're still proving and tweaking. But that type of testing is what you need to do in order to figure out what works and what doesn't and where we need to fix things in our model.
Gotcha. I think for me, at least, the scariest or the hardest part is always going 0 to 1 with a new channel. When you're sitting in front of my finance person and they're going, all right, so what are your expectations here? And I'm like, I have no idea.
Yeah.
How do you walk somebody through something like that where, they haven't done it before, they're trying to add a new channel? What are some things that you think about, if you don't have any benchmarks, you don't have anything, like what is it that you're looking for?
Well, we're looking for, it's going to be a test. First of all, I think you don't jump into the deep end. So I would always sort of say a bit more of a cautious approach. Okay, well, let's test this out. If we think that this particular channel, whatever that channel may be, is the way to go. We're going to test it. So we have to do some research, first of all. So I'll have some questions to ask. Why do you think this is the right channel? What customers are you going after? And how do you know that those customers, that you can find them within that particular channel? And so like, what is that evidence? What do we know that they're, and what's the size of that marketplace? And then fundamentally, we just, okay, let's pick a dollar amount. Let's pick something that we're comfortable with and a time frame that we're comfortable with. And let's just measure and see. Because you can't, at least my philosophy is you can't fault somebody for what they don't know. Like we have to try to see and test. And then does it work or does it not work? So, it's always the sort of test, iterate, and measure, and then come back and reflect. And it's that coming back and reflect piece that I think sometimes young startups forget to do. They get so caught up in the rush of it all, like let's do this, and then they'll march down one particular channel. So maybe they'll ramp up their SEO spending and pick up, spend all kinds of money on particular keywords. But are they then coming back and measuring and saying what was the success of that particular campaign in that channel? Did it make sense? Did it not make sense? What were the outputs? Versus just, okay, now we're moving on to something else, or we're just going to keep roaring ahead. It's the sort of, my role is to sort of put in the checkpoints to come back, and the accountability of how was that? Did that make sense? What is the output? If we feel that it's a successful channel, it is generating the leads that we want to see at a reasonable rate. Is it predictable as the next stage? Was it a fluke, or like what worked and what didn't?
I'm curious, how do you think about timing? Because especially when it comes down to a new channel, like the first months are going to be the worst months. And so if you're measuring specifically with outbound, if you're measuring the impact or the effectiveness of the channel based on your first 4-month metrics, you're doing your math wrong.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't get good until 6-12 months, which is probably what every sales development consultant or every outsourcing company for any demand gen channel is going to tell you. Like I've heard, content marketing, it takes a year. You got to do it for a year before the results start to kick in. How do you balance the well, this is what a consultant told me versus you want to give it the best kick at the can, but you also don't want to be doing it forever without kind of looking at the spend and the ratios.
Yep. And I think that's an excellent question. And it's a challenge. It absolutely is. And the example that I'll give is one, with Proposify as an example. We've recently, this past year, did an experiment where we were experimenting with reaching franchises and exploring a new channel to reach a franchise as a as sort of a market segment, let's just say,
Mhm.
or channel, and the channel to reach them. I was like, well, how do we reach franchises? Where do they go? It's like, okay, well, from our research, it was like, okay, well, they're a very close knit group, and they do a lot of trade shows. And so it's a lot of sort of boots on the ground, sending people to conferences and trade shows. That's not typically been our model. That's a very different approach. And, but the hypothesis is that this is a pocket that is underserved, and that we feel we have a good fit with our software. So let's give it a try. And so the discussion is around, this is a hypothesis. We don't know for sure, but here's the research that we've done. And then we talk about, as a team, we talk about what is the expectation in terms of timeline. Like, we knew at the outset that going to conferences and trade shows is going to be a long haul game. This is not going to be something that we're going to come back and have like massive lists of customers to be outbound on in a 3-month window. It's a longer closing. It's relationship building. So I think it really boils down to doing your research and understanding the channel, and then having the conversations at the outset of what is a reasonable timeline that makes sense, that you can all agree upon. Because what you don't want is to have those, such as myself, sort of sitting in finance, having the expectation that this is going to give me a really good ROI within 3 months. But the sales team on the ground are saying, no, this was a longer, sales and marketing are saying, no, this is a longer term strategy where we're building relationships, and this is going to happen gradually over time with a sort of a land and expand approach. It's not going to be suddenly our pipeline fills up and we're going to have lots of deals coming out of this in the next 3 months. So I don't think that, it's not a black and white, easy answer, but I do think what's important here is that the team is all aligned, and you're setting that hypothesis and research out at the beginning to say, here's what we believe to be true. And as you go through, and you do set a time frame, like we had established and talked about, we're going to try this for a year. We talked about that this is something that we know is not going to be immediate, but it's something that we want to invest in.
I would love to kind of double click on some of the math elements here. Because both times I took math 11, I did C minus, C plus. So help me understand, what kind of math, what numbers are you looking at that you're trying to get when you're, say, looking at a brand new channel?
Well, I think whether it's a new channel or not, like the measurements, the things that we look at as far as the metrics, the KPIs are similar, like across the board, that we just sort of like, our customer acquisition cost is a big one. But I think at the outset, when you're evaluating whether or not for the channel, it's really the size of the market. Like, we start with that. What's the customer base? Does that make sense? Is the opportunity, do we believe the opportunity is there? But that's hard to sort of put a metric on. But when you take it back and sort of internally in terms of our metrics, we're looking at what is the cost per lead? What's the customer acquisition cost from that particular channel? Is it more efficient than a different channel? Is it driving more leads? Is it driving better quality of leads? So these are the things that we tend to look at and focus on. And it doesn't really matter if it's a new channel or an existing channel, because we are going to be evaluating across the board these various channels to see which one is generating the most leads, but also the best quality leads, because you got to measure both.
Right. So it's, if I compare it back, you start with the size of the market. Okay, we've got 1,000 franchises or 10,000 franchises. Okay, how many reachable prospects through this specific channel? What is the cost per lead, cost per acquisition, and then what is the quality of those leads, customers coming through, and then what is the scalability of the channel? So, like, do we have infinite scalability, or is it limited to, like, we're going to go to these 7 conferences and that's it?
Yeah. Like, we try to identify what is the size of the opportunity here. Like, is it low hanging fruit and it's super exciting? There's lots of great opportunity and we feel like we could really scale into this quickly. Is it something that's a great opportunity, but it's going to take some time? Like, you have to evaluate the opportunity at the outset, because what you want to be, you have limited resources, limited time, limited dollars. So you have to make sure that you're effectively focusing those efforts into the areas that's going to give you the greatest payback. What makes the most sense, which channel? And so you do have to, figure out which channel works better than the other. So especially when you're evaluating a new, it's going to be evaluated against the other things that you're already doing. Is it performing equally as well or not? And what is a reasonable time frame to estimate that?
Yeah, just on average, and I don't want to pin you down here, but how much time would you give a new channel? Is it 4 months? Is it 6 months? Is it a year? Is it more about the amount, like the spend?
For us, I tend to focus, and maybe because I'm a finance person, so I just qualify this by saying I look at everything through sort of the finance lens. It's just part of who I am. But in my experience, the shorter time frames, like 3 to 6 months, those early indicators tend to pan out. And so I find sometimes you can hold on to things in hopes because you really thought it might be true, and you're waiting. Oh no, we just need more data. We just need more data. But at the end of the day, there's always exceptions to this rule, but in my experience, it's been that those early indicators, generally the trends continue to pan out. So if you wait, and especially in startups and in the tech world, things change so quickly. You don't often have the luxury of giving something a year. You have to move quickly.
Yeah, totally understand. It also, it's tricky because some channels like SEO, or inbound content marketing, it's tricky to measure, right? It's not just a straight, single touch attribution. They're touching, like I look at, you try and measure the impact of doing this podcast. It's impossible. I believe it drives a good amount of interest, and it, at the very least, it keeps the brand fresh, it keeps new and interesting content. But like, how do I put an ROI on something like a podcast, or how do I try and tie it to any metrics? Because it's impossible. I don't know if it's impossible, but it's very, very hard.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's impossible as somebody who appreciates a good model and modeling. However, for all intents and purposes, it's very, very close to impossible in the sense of really nailing it down, because it's all going to be based on a level of assumptions. You have to sort of make a lot of assumptions in that to determine, what is the ROI on that. The only, one way that I could suggest to test is like, if you shut it down, what's the impact? Right? Then, but that's a pretty significant way to test it, right? Like, okay.
What we're working towards is like a full kind of go-to-market model being a big old spreadsheet that has, the channels, the cost per lead, cost to acquire, quality, scalability, kind of all measured. Can you help me understand, what this looks like?
Yeah. And I think what I'll say is I think you can overcomplicate this easily, and it can be a bit overwhelming because you can build out this massive model. But at its core, you're building a systematic, repeatable engine that's going to involve various functional departments. So you're going to have the sales team, you're going to have the marketing, CS and finance involved. And what you're wanting to do is sit back and you start with, I would say starting out, if a new CEO was coming to me to say, how am I going to build this go to market? What's your recommendation? I would sit down with them and with the leaders of each of their departments and say, okay, let's take a step back and let's look at, and then the model will flow out of it. The model is not the drive of it. So we're going to sit back and say, okay, what's your target market? Who is it you're trying to reach? So what's your customer? And where are they? And do you have the product market fit? What's the messaging? What's your product pricing? What's your sales messaging? Like, all of that has to come together. And then from there, the model is going to flow. Then you're just going to measure, because the model is really just coming out of that. So the model is going to be, okay, we're going to spend this much dollars. We're going to put this much investment into this marketing engine with these various channels. Here's where the spend is going to go. So we'll just drop that in a spreadsheet. And then we're going to say, okay, we're going to make some assumptions based on how many leads that's going to drive. Okay, here are the leads now. Those leads are going to be naturally, we know how much we spent, we know how many leads we assume we're going to get out, or in the after, we'll measure, see how many leads we got. That's your cost per lead. And then you can evaluate across various standards in industry in terms of what's a fair cost per lead, but it varies greatly across industries. What's the cost per lead? And then like a marketing qualified lead. And then and then next step is sales needs to accept those leads into their pipeline or not, which that in my experience usually is the point of contention between sales and marketing. Sure you've come across that. But ultimately, just to continue the model at its sort of basic key components, it's the sales qualified opportunity. They're going to look at that and they're going to say, yeah, we accept that lead, or we don't. They're going to have their own qualifying, and it goes into their pipeline process. And then at the end of the day, it's going to spit out either closed sale, closed one. I mean, that's a very simplified model. But my point is that what your spreadsheet looks like and the actual model itself can vary greatly. And I wouldn't want somebody to get sort of overwhelmed by that, because that's sort of almost the easy part. It's the answering the questions, the key components. That's really the important driver of that. So, and making sure that the alignment is there, particularly between sales and marketing. Like the message, do we have the right pricing strategy? Do we have the right product market fit? Are we talking to the right group of people? Are we using the right channels? All of those questions, like when I start to build the model, I don't even start in the spreadsheet until those things have been answered and the team has come together.
But what we believe is that there are 4 funnels: meet, disco, manage, nurture. The meet funnel is your prospecting funnel. The disco is your discovery and closing funnel. Manage is how you manage your current customers. And then your nurture is how you nurture accounts that aren't ready to buy yet. And the core idea is these are all linked. You need definitions, proper definitions for each of them, entry, exit criteria, and stage definitions for each of them. And you also need a core process or core processes for each of them. For this is how we pass, one to another. This is how they move. This is who's involved. This is your sort of racy or your swim lanes, however you like to see it. But they all need to be measured independently. And I think the nurture one is something that has gotten traditionally ignored and written off as, oh, these aren't valuable because they're not ready to buy yet. But from my experience ramping outbound teams, if you ignore that, that's half the value of an outbound team. That's half the value of any marketing channel, right? Like we get so much extra value out of our marketing organization because our team is looking at that nurture funnel and we have processes dedicated. It's hard to, I think, as a new sales leader or somebody who spent time in sales and now collaborating with a finance person, it's tough to get into that mindset of this is a collaboration when it feels like your entire existence has been a fight over commissions, over budget, over getting the raise, getting that head count. But it's not a fight with a finance person. You're the kind of bearer of bad news that, hey, this doesn't make sense for the model, right?
Yeah.
I'm not going to get into like the commission issues. We've all had commissions issues and those aren't fun, but it is a tricky relationship to bridge.
Yeah,
Almost.
Exactly. And I think if you're new in your career and you're new into that position where now you're the sales professional who is in charge of helping to forecast and maybe in charge of the team and have to put up the numbers, I would say get out ahead of it and talk with your finance person and find out what's the process here look like? What's your expectations? How does this work? And then start to collaborate, because if you can work together on that, you will get a lot further. And like I said, when the sales leader is actively involved in collaborating with the finance person and setting those targets and setting the budget, in my experience, they hit those targets far more often. Because then, I mean, in addition to sort of just the basic, asking the right questions, poking holes in the logic, basic human nature is, okay, if we work together and we're collaborating, I want you to succeed. You're not fighting against me. Because I also want us to hit our targets and to have a very accurate forecast and budget as much as I can. So I am not trying to work against you. I'm trying to set a realistic number that I think that we can hit and I think that you can hit, and I want you to be successful. So going into it with that type of attitude and perspective, I think will get you a better outcome.
Totally agree. The only thing worse than being behind on your targets for the year come rolling around October is that you're behind on your targets because you were overly optimistic last November and you didn't run a good process.
Yeah. And in my experience,
I've never done that. Never.
Yeah.
Not once.
I have seen, in my experience, it's odd because I have seen sales leaders be way too optimistic and try to set targets way too high. Mm-hmm. And say like, yeah, we're going to just blow this out of the water. We're going to do amazing. And then I'm coming back and going like, there's no way in hell I'm putting this into our budget. Like, I don't believe this for a second. Like, that is a big disconnect. And that ground needs to be met. And then there's the flip side where I've been the one that says, we need stretch targets here. We need to hit higher numbers. And your targets that you're suggesting are way too low and you need to be pulled up. So it goes both ways. And I've seen it go both ways. So it kind of depends on, it can depend on the commission structure and how things are set up, the motivations. Are you motivated to have sort of super high targets to hit them? Or are you motivated by making sure your targets are low so that you can hit and show that you've hit your quota? Like, it depends on the structure and the nature of the motivations and how things are set up.
Well, I think it's hard for salespeople to come into a leadership role and then fully appreciate that I'm going to give a revenue plan, and then finance and operations are going to go are going to decide how much we spend on everything based on this plan. That is something that I don't think I really truly appreciated until I had gone in and missed a budget a couple of times and had to make changes and lay people off because of my missed assumptions. It's one of the worst feelings.
It is. And thank you so much for bringing that up. And I think because that is so fundamentally important for sales professionals to understand. And it is such a common error that I see, and not just with sales leaders, but, founders, CEOs, like they're all tend to be involved, especially at the early outset. But it is such a common issue that they are overly optimistic and set sales targets and expectations in the first few years of testing this, especially, that are just lofty and maybe a bit unrealistic and don't really come to fruition. And then they're ramping up a team in their startup that if those numbers don't come through, you have to lay off these people. And we've all been there, and I've seen it happen, and it's super painful, and it's not an experience that I recommend to anyone. So knowing what the repercussions are of missing and what these numbers, what goes into these numbers and what decisions are made based on these numbers, I think that's a really important learning.